Don't eat that dessert! The shout sliced through the polite murmur of the gala like a shard of broken glass. Heads turned, 100 conversations dying at once. On the polished marble stage, Evangeline Reed, the formidable CEO of Reed International, froze. Her silver spoon, holding a perfect sphere of glistening mousse, hovered an inch from her lips. Her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, narrowed, scanning the opulent ballroom until they landed on the source of the disruption. It was a janitor. A man in a plain gray uniform, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed grotesquely out of place amid the champagne and crystal. 2 security guards were already moving, their black suits a blur against the gold leaf walls. "Get him out of here!" Ms. Reed's voice was low, a whip crack of controlled fury that carried farther than his shout. But the janitor, Darian Merrick, fought against the guard's grip, his gaze locked on the dessert. "Please, ma'am, you can't eat that. Just listen to me." His voice was raw, desperate. "It's the glaze. I can smell it." The guards grunted, their professionalism strained as they tried to wrestle him backward without causing a bigger scene. Darian's feet scraped against the floor. "Acacia," he yelled, the word tearing from his throat. "It's made with acacia nut oil." A gasp rippled through the crowd, not in understanding but in scandalized shock. Adrian Crown, the company's handsome and ever-composed vice president, was instantly at Ms. Reed's side. He placed a calming hand on her arm, his expression a perfect mask of concern and apology. "Evangeline, I am so sorry," he murmured, his voice a low thrum of reassurance. "Security will handle this." The man is clearly unwell. Evangeline Reed didn't look at him. Her entire focus was a laser beam fixed on Darian. The spoon in her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. For a fraction of a second, something other than anger flickered in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a wall of glacial authority. "You're fired," she said, her words dropping into the silence like chips of ice. She wasn't speaking to the guards, but directly to Darian. "Get this person out of my sight, and make sure he never sets foot in this building again." The finality in her tone was absolute. The guards, now empowered, heaved Darian toward the service exit. He gave one last, pleading look at the CEO. "My wife," he started, his voice cracking, but the heavy doors swung shut, cutting him off. The ballroom's atmosphere, momentarily fractured, began to stitch itself back together. Adrian Crown smoothly signaled the orchestra to resume playing. Waiters began to circulate again. He leaned in and spoke softly to Miss Reed. "A regrettable incident. I'll have a full security review on your desk in the morning. Some people are just unstable." Evangeline Reed set her spoon down, her appetite gone. She stared at the dessert, a beautiful, perfect creation that now seemed monstrous. Unstable, perhaps, but the man's terror had felt real. And that word, acacia, a word so rare, so specific, a word that held the power to kill her. She pushed the plate away, a chill creeping up her spine that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Darian stumbled out into the cold night air, his shoulder aching where a guard had shoved him against the doorframe. The city's noise crashed over him, horns blaring, sirens wailing in the distance. He was jobless, humiliated, all because he had tried to stop a ghost from appearing twice in his life. The smell had hit him the moment the pastry chef wheeled the dessert cart past the alcove he was cleaning. It was faint, almost undetectable under the cloying sweetness of chocolate and raspberry, but for Darian, it was as loud as a scream. The warm, nutty, slightly floral scent of acacia oil, the scent that had filled the emergency room 5 years ago, the scent of his wife's last breath. He walked for hours, the city lights blurring through the angry tears he refused to let fall. He had lost his job trying to save a woman who wouldn't even listen, a woman who looked at him like he was something she'd scrape off the bottom of her shoe. How was he going to explain this to Ivy? How was he going to afford her next refill of the EpiPens that were her lifeline? The same lifeline he hadn't been able to give his wife in time. When he finally pushed open the door to his small third-floor apartment, the smell of stale air and the day's lingering dinner greeted him. A small lamp was on in the living room, casting a soft glow on a drawing taped to the wall. It was a crayon portrait of him and a little girl with bright, smiling eyes, both holding hands under a lopsided sun. A small figure stirred on the couch, wrapped in a faded quilt. "Daddy?" Ivy's voice was sleepy, her 7-year-old face clouded with concern. "You're late." Darian forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff and foreign. He crossed the room and knelt by the couch, stroking her hair. "Sorry, sweet pea. Work ran late. Big party tonight. Did they have cake?" His throat tightened. "They had a dessert," he said, his voice quiet. "But it wasn't a good one." Ivy's brow furrowed. She had her mother's eyes, full of a deep, knowing sensitivity. "Are you sad, Daddy?" He couldn't lie to her. He just pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the clean, familiar scent of her shampoo. He held her tight, the fierce, protective love for her a physical ache in his chest. Just tired, baby girl. Just really, really tired he had failed. He'd lost everything trying to prevent a tragedy, and for what? The richest woman in the city now thought he was a lunatic, and he was unemployed. He had no plan, no savings to speak of, just a daughter with a ticking time bomb in her bloodstream and the haunting memory of a scent he could never forget. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of his daughter's breathing as she drifted back to sleep. The world outside felt impossibly large and cold. He had never felt more alone. The next afternoon, the knock on his apartment door was so sharp and authoritative it sounded like it could crack the cheap wood. Darian froze, his mind racing. Was it the landlord, demanding the rent he now couldn't pay? Was it someone from his old job, delivering a final, formal notice? He peered through the peephole, and his blood ran cold. Parked on the street below, gleaming under the weak sunlight like a predatory jewel, was a cherry-red Ferrari. And standing in the dim, peeling hallway of his rundown apartment building, looking utterly, dangerously out of place, was Evangeline Reed. Darian's heart hammered against his ribs. For a wild second, he thought about not opening the door, pretending he wasn't home, but the sheer force of her presence seemed to press through the wood, leaving him no choice. He took a shaky breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door inward. Evangeline Reed stood there, dressed in a sharp, dark gray pantsuit that probably cost more than his car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, and her face was a mask of cold composure. Her stormy eyes swept over his worn t-shirt and the cramped, dim interior of his apartment with a flicker of distaste before locking onto his. "Mr. Merrick," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been at the gala, low, cutting, and accustomed to absolute obedience. "May I come in?" It wasn't a question. Darian stepped back numbly, and she glided past him into the small living room. The scent of her expensive perfume, a clean, sharp fragrance like winter air, filled the space, completely overwhelming the familiar smell of his home. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the worn rug, her posture rigid, turning slowly to survey the room, the crayon drawing on the wall, the pile of Ivy's picture books on the coffee table, the faded quilt still crumpled on the couch. "How did you know?" she asked, her back now to him. Darian's throat was dry. "How did I know what?" She turned, her eyes pinning him to the spot. "Don't play games with me. I don't have the time or the patience for them. You shouted a word in that ballroom last night. Acacia. A word that is not in the general vocabulary. A word that is, in fact, the primary component of an allergy so rare it affects less than 0.01% of the population. An allergy that is my most closely guarded secret. So I will ask you one more time. How did you know?" Her intensity was suffocating. He saw the suspicion in her eyes, the cold calculation. She thought he was part of a plot, a threat to be neutralized. His own fear was quickly being replaced by a surge of old, familiar grief. "It was the smell," he said, his voice raspy. "The smell," she repeated flatly, her expression unchanging. "You smelled a single ingredient in a complex dessert from 50 feet away in a room filled with perfume and food? You never forget a smell like that," Darian shot back, a raw edge to his voice. "Not when it's the last thing you remember before your world ends." He saw a flicker of something in her gaze, not sympathy, but a sharp, analytical curiosity. He pushed past her and went to the small, cluttered shelf beside the TV. He picked up a framed photo and held it out to her. It was a picture of a smiling young woman with bright, kind eyes, her arms slung around a younger, happier version of himself. "My wife Elena," he said, his voice thick. "5 years ago, we went to a little cafe for our anniversary. They had a new pastry chef. He wanted to be exotic, use rare ingredients. He used acacia nut oil in the frosting of her cupcake." Darian's hand trembled. "She went into anaphylactic shock before we even got the check. She was gone by the time the paramedics arrived." He took a breath, the air burning his lungs. "Her allergy was passed down to our daughter, Ivy. So, yes, Miss Reed, I smelled it. It's burned into my memory. When I smell it, I don't just smell nuts. I smell the inside of an ambulance. I smell a hospital waiting room. I smell failure." He set the picture down and then pointed to the small, colorful medical alert bracelet on Ivy's wrist in the crayon drawing on the wall. "That's why I shouted. That's why I got myself fired, because I couldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Not again." The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen. Evangeline Reed stared at the photograph, then at the drawing, and finally, back at him. The icy mask on her face had cracked. He could see the barest hint of the woman beneath, a woman who looked shaken, vulnerable. "I see," she said, her voice softer, stripped of its commanding edge. She looked down at her own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "My personal chef, the only one who knew the full extent of my dietary restrictions, was let go 3 years ago after a confidentiality breach. My medical records are sealed by a court order. The guest list for that gala and the menu were personally approved by my vice president, Adrian Crown. The dessert was listed as a Valrhona chocolate mousse with raspberry coulis. No mention of any nuts, let alone that one." She looked up, and her eyes were filled with a cold, hard clarity. "You didn't just save me from an allergic reaction last night, Mr. Merrick. You saved me from an assassination attempt." Darian stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with sickening certainty. This wasn't about a chef's mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated attack. "I came here to find out if you were a threat," Evangeline continued, her voice regaining its strength. "But it's clear you are something else entirely. You're the only person who saw what was right in front of everyone's faces. My security team is either incompetent or compromised. My inner circle is where the snake is hiding." She took a step closer, her gaze intense. "I am offering you a job. Not as a janitor. I need someone who can move through my company without being noticed. Someone who is invisible to the people in power. I need you to be my eyes and ears. I need you to help me find the person who tried to murder me." Darian was speechless. "Me?" "I'm a janitor. What can I do?" "You can listen," she said sharply. "You can watch. People say things in front of the cleaning staff they would never say in the boardroom. They don't see you. That's your advantage. It's the one advantage I don't have." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a checkbook and a pen. "Your daughter, Ivy. Her medication must be expensive, more than you know," Darian whispered. Evangeline wrote quickly, her pen strokes sharp and decisive. She tore the check out and held it out to him. "This is a signing bonus, $250,000. It should handle her immediate needs. Find the traitor for me, mister. Merrick and I will set up a trust that will cover her medical care for the rest of her life. You will never have to worry about the cost of an EpiPen again." Darian looked at the check, then at her face. This was insane. It was dangerous, but he also saw the small, hand-drawn picture on his wall, and he felt the crushing weight of his empty bank account. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline. It was the only way out. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. A faint, mirthless smile touched Evangeline Reed's lips. "First thing tomorrow, my head of security will be fired for last night's breach. You will be reinstated with an apology for the misunderstanding. And then," she said, her eyes turning to Flint, "you will go back to being invisible, and you will find me a snake." The next morning felt surreal. Darian walked through the towering glass doors of Reed International, the same doors he'd been thrown out of less than 36 hours ago, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The security guard at the front desk, a man who usually just grunted at him, now watched him with wide, curious eyes. Whispers followed him down the hall toward the staff locker rooms, his name a ghost on the lips of people who'd never bothered to learn it before. His supervisor, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, pulled him aside before he could even change. "Merrick, what in God's name happened?" "1 minute, you're on a blacklist that would get you arrested for trespassing. The next, I get a call from corporate HR at 6 in the morning telling me you're reinstated with back pay and an official apology for the unfortunate misunderstanding." "What did you do?" Darian just shook his head, his mind replaying Evangeline Reed's final instructions. "Say as little as possible. You were confused. You thought you smelled something spoiled. You overreacted. They have accepted your apology." "I just made a mistake, Sal," Darian mumbled. "Guess they decided not to hold it against me." Sal squinted, clearly not buying it. But the directive from on high was absolute. "Whatever, just keep your head down from now on, will you? You've got the entire building spooked." As Darian pushed his cart onto the executive floor later that day, the atmosphere was even thicker with tension. He was a walking ghost story. But as he emptied trash cans and polished glass walls, he felt a new, sharp focus. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a hunter. Just as Miss Reed had predicted, the head of security had been summarily fired. The official memo cited a severe lapse in event protocol. The new head of security was a grim-faced woman who looked like she'd been carved from granite. The message was clear. There were no more second chances. Around noon, a junior executive intercepted him by the elevators. "Mr. Merrick? Mr. Crown would like a word with you." Darian's stomach clenched. He followed the executive to the vice president's office, a corner suite with a view that stretched to the horizon. Adrian Crown was standing by the window, looking out at the city he seemed to believe he owned. He turned as Darian entered, a polished, sympathetic smile on his face. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were like a reptile's, cold, ancient, and unnervingly still. "Darian, please come in," Adrian said, his voice smooth as silk. "Close the door." Darian did as he was told, his hand feeling clammy on the doorknob. "I just wanted to personally apologize for what happened at the gala," Adrian began, gesturing to a leather chair that Darian pointedly ignored. "It was a high-stress situation, and clearly things were mishandled. I'm just glad Miss Reed is a forgiving woman and that we can put this unfortunate incident behind us." He paused, studying Darian's face. "I have to admit, I'm curious. You seemed so certain. What was it you thought you smelled?" Darian recited the lie Evangeline had prepared for him. "I don't know, sir. The kitchen. Sometimes things get left out. I thought maybe some cream in the dessert had turned. I have a daughter with a weak stomach, and I guess I panicked. I was out of line." Adrian's smile widened, but it still held no warmth. A father's instinct. Commendable, in its own way. "Well, we are all relieved that everything is back to normal. You may go." Darian nodded and turned to leave, his heart pounding. He felt Adrian's eyes on his back the entire way. It wasn't the gaze of a man who believed his story. It was the gaze of a predator sizing up an unexpected anomaly in its territory. That night, Darian's cleaning route took him back to Adrian Crown's office. The building was quiet, the sky outside a deep, starless black. He worked methodically, his hands moving on autopilot as his senses screamed with awareness. He emptied the main trash can, finding nothing but coffee cups and discarded printouts. But Evangeline had been specific in her instructions, delivered via text from a burner phone she'd had delivered to his apartment. Check the shredder bin, and look for anything that doesn't belong. The shredder bin was full. Under company policy, he was supposed to just tie off the bag and send it down for incineration. Tonight, he untied it. He laid the clear bag on the floor, the beam of his small flashlight playing over the confetti of paper. It was hopeless. Then he saw it. Near the bottom of the bag, something that wasn't paper, a tiny, dark glass vial, no bigger than his pinky finger. It was empty, but when he carefully worked it out of the bag and unscrewed the cap, a ghost of a scent hit him. It was faint, almost completely gone, but it was there. Warm, nutty, floral. Acacia. His breath hitched. He quickly screwed the cap back on and slipped the vial into a small evidence bag he'd brought from home. He was retying the shredder bag when he heard a faint ding from down the hall. The private executive elevator. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He shoved the bag with the vial deep into the pocket of his coveralls and grabbed his mop, frantically sloshing it back and forth across the floor just as the office door swung open. Adrian Crown stood in the doorway, his briefcase in hand. He stopped short, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Still here, Darian?" "Working hard, I see." "Yes, sir," Darian said, his voice miraculously steady. "Just finishing up this floor." Adrian's gaze flickered from Darian to the shredder bin, then back. For a terrifying moment, Darian was sure he knew. He was sure those cold eyes could see the vial burning a hole in his pocket. But Adrian just gave a curt nod. "Well, don't let me keep you," he said, stepping inside and moving toward his desk. "I just forgot a file." Darian nodded, packed up his cart, and walked out of the office, every muscle in his back screaming, expecting a hand to grab his shoulder. But nothing happened. He didn't dare breathe until he was back in the service elevator, the doors sliding shut, plunging him into the safety of humming, fluorescent-lit anonymity. In the solitude of the janitor's closet on the ground floor, he pulled out the burner phone. His fingers trembled as he typed a short, simple message to the number Evangeline had given him. "I found something in his office, a small bottle. I think it's the oil." The reply came back almost instantly. "Do not come to me. Go home. Lock your doors. I will handle it from here." A second message followed. "You're no longer invisible, Darian. Be careful." The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and street lamps smearing across his vision. Evangeline's warning echoed in his head, a cold counterpoint to the pounding of his own heart. "You're no longer invisible." He parked his car 2 blocks away from his apartment, circling the building on foot, scanning alleys and doorways for anyone who didn't belong. The ordinary sounds of the city, a dog barking, music drifting from an open window, now seemed menacing. Inside, he triple-checked the locks on his door and windows. He found Ivy asleep on the couch again, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. He gently lifted her into his arms, her small body warm and trusting against his, and carried her to bed. As he tucked her in, he noticed her medical alert bracelet had slipped down her wrist. He carefully tightened it, his fingers tracing the engraved letters. Severe allergy, acacia, anaphylaxis risk. He was in over his head. This wasn't a game. He was a janitor caught in a war between billionaires, and the vial in his pocket felt as heavy as a grenade. He sat at his small kitchen table for hours, the vial on the table in front of him, watching the first gray light of dawn creep into the sky. The burner phone buzzed just after 6 a.m. It was Evangeline. "We need the vial. It's our only physical evidence. The Central Library opens at 9. Go to the 3rd floor, nonfiction, section 793.7. There's a hollowed-out book called The Art of Deception. Place the vial inside. Leave immediately. Someone will retrieve it." Her instructions were precise, cold, and left no room for error. She was treating this like a military operation, and he realized with a jolt that for her, it probably was. Work was a new kind of hell. Adrian Crown's invisible hand was now pressing down on him. Sal, his supervisor, approached him with an apologetic grimace. "Corporate just changed the cleaning rotations, Merrick. They want one dedicated man for the sub-levels. That's you. Boiler room, electrical, server maintenance floors, and the executive garage. It's dirty work, but the order came straight from the VP's office." Darian understood immediately. Adrian was isolating him, pushing him down into the guts of the building where there were fewer eyes, where he was out of the way. Or, a colder thought surfaced, where an accident could happen without witnesses. He spent the next few hours in the sweltering heat of the boiler room, the roar of the machinery a deafening wall of sound. Every shadow seemed to move, every clang of metal made him jump. At 8:45, he cleaned himself up, clocked out for his break, and walked the 6 blocks to the library. The building was a quiet sanctuary of wood polish and old paper. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him as he walked to the non-fiction section, his janitor's uniform making him stand out. He found section 793.7, Puzzles and Games. His fingers trembled as he scanned the titles. There it was, The Art of Deception. It looked ancient. He pulled it from the shelf, and it fell open to a neat, hollowed-out square in the center. He slipped the small bagged vial inside, closed the book, and slid it back into place. His part was done. He walked out without looking back, the feeling of being watched prickling the back of his neck. Back at the tower, he descended into the cool, silent concrete of the executive garage. It was a cavernous space reserved for the company's elite, filled with silent, gleaming machines that cost more than his apartment building. He was supposed to be sweeping the floors, but he moved slowly, his eyes scanning everything. He was in the far corner, near the private service elevator, when he saw him. Adrian Crown, standing beside his sleek black sedan. But he wasn't alone. He was talking to a man Darian had never seen before, a man who definitely wasn't an executive. He was wiry, with a nervous energy, dressed in a nondescript jacket and jeans. He kept glancing around, his eyes darting into the shadows. Darian ducked behind a massive concrete pillar, his heart pounding. He couldn't hear their words, only the low, urgent murmur of their voices. He watched as Adrian passed a thick manila envelope to the stranger. The man took it, opened it to check the contents, stacks of cash, and then passed a small, square, insulated box back to Adrian. It looked like a medical cooler, the kind used for transporting lab samples. Adrian placed the box carefully in his trunk, slammed it shut, and said a final, sharp word to the man. The stranger nodded quickly and scurried away toward the pedestrian exit, melting back into the city. Adrian got in his car and drove off. Darian waited until the garage was silent again before he stepped out from behind the pillar. An envelope of cash for a medical box. It wasn't proof of anything, not legally. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had just seen the snake meeting its supplier. That night, after he tucked Ivy in, he almost jumped out of his skin when he heard a soft knock at his door. He crept to the peephole, his hand hovering over his phone, ready to dial 911. It was a young woman in a bike messenger's uniform, holding a small, flat package. "For Merrick?" she asked through the door. He opened it cautiously. She had him sign a screen and then handed him the package before jogging back down the stairs. It wasn't a bomb. It was a tablet, sleek and new. He turned it on. There was only one app on the screen, a secure messaging service. A new message was already waiting. Lab confirmed, concentrated synthesized acacia oil, industrial grade, untraceable. The vial contained enough to cause a fatal reaction in under a minute. This was not a warning. It was a kill shot. Darian sank onto his couch, the tablet feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. A second message appeared. You were right to be suspicious of the garage. I had a theory. The man he met is a disgraced biochemist named Dr. Alpert. He specializes in synthesizing organic compounds off-market. The box you saw was likely a second dose. He's going to try again. We need to know when and how. Darian's mind raced. Adrian wouldn't try the same trick twice. The next attempt would be different, more direct. He typed a reply, his fingers stiff. What do I do? Evangeline's answer was immediate and terrifying. You get closer to him. He's isolating you in the basement. Use it. The server room you now clean is the company's brain, his communications, his schedules, his finances. It all runs through there. Find a way in. I need to know his next move before he makes it. The tablet felt alien in his hands, a sleek piece of forbidden technology that represented a line he never thought he'd cross. Evangeline was asking him to commit a felony. Hacking, corporate espionage. These were things from movies, not from the life of a man who spent his nights wrestling with trash bags and floor buffers. His first instinct was to refuse, to tell her it was too much. He typed, I can't. I'm not a hacker. If I get caught, I'll lose Ivy. The reply was instantaneous, stripped of all sympathy. If he succeeds, we all lose her. He tried to kill me with a nut. Do you think a man like that will leave loose ends? A janitor who saw too much? A little girl who could identify him? We are past the point of safe choices, Darian. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the closed door to Ivy's bedroom and felt a cold dread wash over him. Evangeline was right. They were already tied to this, a loose end in Adrian Crown's murderous plan. His invisibility was gone. Safety was an illusion. The next afternoon, the illusion shattered completely. He got a frantic call from the school nurse. Ivy was having a reaction. It wasn't major. She'd traded a cookie at lunch with a new friend whose hands had been dusty with peanut flour from a different snack. It was minor cross-contamination, but it was enough. Her lips were swelling, her breathing shallow. The nurse had already administered her EpiPen. Darian broke every traffic law getting to the school. He burst into the nurse's office to find Ivy pale and shaken, a teacher rubbing her back. The immediate danger was over, but the terror that seized Darian was absolute. It was the same helplessness, the same icy fear he'd felt 5 years ago. This time, the EpiPen had worked. But what about next time? What if he was in jail, and she was in the foster system, and there was no one to double-check the ingredients? He held her in the car on the way home, his hand shaking as he stroked her hair. I'm okay, Daddy, she whispered, her voice still raspy. I know, sweet pea, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. Daddy's here. That night, he picked up the tablet again. His resolve was no longer fragile. It was forged in steel. He sent a single message to Evangeline. Tell me what to do. The instructions came an hour later, a detailed schematic of the sub-level server farm. The main terminal is in server room 3. Security is biometric, but your janitorial access card has been given a 90-second override window. A gift from a programmer who owes me a favor. It can only be used once. A package will be delivered to you tomorrow. It will contain a data cloning drive disguised as a portable phone charger. It will copy the target directories automatically. You just have to plug it in and get out. The next evening, Darian felt a grim sense of purpose as he descended into the building's cold, concrete heart. The phone charger was in his pocket. He spent the first hour of his shift just watching. He mapped the security cameras in his head. He timed the patrol route of the lone guard, a bored-looking man named Henderson who made a full circuit every 22 minutes. He needed a diversion. 20 minutes into Henderson's next patrol, Darian went into a utility closet and tripped the circuit breaker for the lighting in the west corridor, plunging a 50-yard stretch of the basement into darkness. Then he went back to his cart and kept mopping. 3 minutes later, Henderson's radio crackled. The guard sighed, muttered something under his breath, and began a slow, grudging walk toward the west corridor to check the breaker. It was a 5-minute walk each way, plus the time to fix it. Darian figured he had 15 minutes max. He moved the second Henderson was out of sight. He walked calmly to server room 3, his cart rattling beside him. He swiped his access card. The light on the panel flashed red, then green. Access granted. He pushed the heavy, insulated door open and slipped inside. The room was like a futuristic tomb, cold and humming with the sound of 1,000,000 digital whispers. Rows upon rows of black servers blinked with tiny, rhythmic lights. He followed Evangeline's map to Terminal C7. He pulled out the data cloner, his hands slick with sweat. He plugged it into the USB port. A tiny blue light on the device began to pulse, slow and steady. It was working. Every hum of the servers, every tick of the industrial clock on the wall, sounded like a gunshot. 5 minutes passed. 10. The pulsing blue light was supposed to turn solid green when the clone was complete. It was still pulsing. Darian's eyes darted to the clock. Henderson had been gone for 14 minutes. He heard it then, the scrape of a shoe in the hallway outside. Henderson was coming back early. Darian's blood turned to ice. The light on the drive was still pulsing. He couldn't leave, not with incomplete data. He flattened himself behind the server rack, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. The handle on the server room door turned. Darian held his breath, but the door didn't open. The handle jiggled once, then stopped. On the other side, Henderson grunted in frustration. Access denied. Darian's 90-second window was gone. The guard, assuming the door was just locked as it should be, continued on his way, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Darian sagged against the server rack, his legs trembling. A moment later, the tiny light on the drive turned a solid, beautiful green. He yanked it from the port, slipped it into his pocket, and exited the room, his movements stiff and jerky. He'd gotten away with it. Back in the janitor's closet, he plugged the drive into the secure tablet. Files appeared, encrypted and meaningless. Then, the decryption program Evangeline had installed began to work its magic. A folder opened. Inside was a copy of Adrian Crown's private, cloud-synced calendar. Darian scanned the entries. Meetings, conference calls, dinner reservations. It all looked normal. Then he saw an entry for the following afternoon. Tomorrow. It was a 2-hour block, marked with the highest level of privacy. The title of the event made the air in his lungs turn to ice. Finalize asset transfer, E. Reed Heritage Trust. He stared at the words on the screen. A cold, legal phrase that felt more violent than any weapon. Finalize asset transfer. It wasn't just a murder plot anymore. It was a complete erasure. Adrian wasn't just planning to kill Evangeline Reed. He was planning to steal her entire history, her legacy, everything her family had ever built. And it was happening tomorrow. Darian's fingers flew across the tablet's keyboard, sending a screenshot of the calendar entry to Evangeline. His message was blunt. Tomorrow afternoon. What is this? His own phone buzzed a second later. Not the secure tablet, but his personal cell. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated for only a second before answering. He's not just coming for the company. Evangeline's voice was a low, dangerous whisper, stripped of all its usual composure. It was the sound of a queen watching a barbarian at the gates. The E. Reed Heritage Trust is my family's foundation. It controls everything. My personal assets, my shares, my homes. It's a fortress, Darian. To finalize a transfer from that trust, he would need my biometric signature, my private encryption keys, and a wet ink signature on an irrevocable power of attorney. He would need to have become me, legally speaking. So he's forged it all? Darian asked, his mind reeling. He must have. He's been planning this for years, piece by piece. But the final transfer, the one that moves the assets offshore, requires a physical authorization, a device, a cryptographic key stored on a hardware drive. It's the one thing that cannot be done remotely. He has to physically connect it to the banking network to give the final command. Her voice hardened. That calendar entry isn't a meeting. It's the moment he plans to plug in that key and bankrupt me. And once I'm worth nothing, I'm just a tragic, unforeseen death. Darian's stomach churned. Where would he keep a key like that? Somewhere close. Somewhere secure, she said. His office. It has to be in his office. He wouldn't risk transporting it until the last possible moment. He's suspicious of me, Evangeline, Darian said, the words coming out in a rush. He almost caught me last night. I can't just walk in there and start searching. You won't have to, she replied, a sharp, tactical edge returning to her voice. He's expecting you to be in the basement. So we'll give him a reason to leave his office unguarded. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., I'm calling an emergency board meeting, off-site. I'm going to tell them I'm considering a full merger with our biggest competitor. It will cause a panic. Adrian will have no choice but to attend. He'll want to be there to control the narrative, and while he's gone, Darian finished, the terrifying shape of the plan forming in his mind. You will have a 20-minute window. Find that drive, Darian. It's the only way to stop him. The next morning, Darian felt like he was walking to his own execution. He pushed his cart onto the executive floor at 9:55 a.m., his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The floor was buzzing with an anxious energy. He saw executives hurrying from their offices, their faces grim. Evangeline's bombshell had landed. At 10:02, Adrian Crown strode out of his office, his face a mask of cool authority. But Darian could see the tension in his jaw. He didn't even glance at the janitor mopping the floor as he headed for the elevators. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, Darian's 20-minute clock started. He slipped into Adrian's office, the scent of expensive cologne and ambition hanging in the air. Where would a man like Adrian hide the key to his entire conspiracy? Darian's eyes scanned the room. The desk was the obvious place. He moved behind it, carefully trying the drawers. All locked. He looked around, his mind racing. A man like Adrian was arrogant. He would want his prize close. His gaze fell on a heavy, leather-bound copy of The Art of War on the bookshelf. It looked too new, the spine uncracked. Darian pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than it should be. He fumbled with the cover, and it fell open. It was a book safe. Inside, nestled in a bed of custom-cut foam, was not a hard drive, but a single, ornate, antique-looking skeleton key. It was heavy, made of brass, with a complex tooth-like pattern at the end. It didn't look like it belonged to anything in this modern office. Tucked beside it was a folded piece of paper. Darian unfolded it. It was a receipt from a high-security private vault company, dated 2 days ago. Item deposited. 1 Pelican case. Item for withdrawal. 1 antique safe deposit key. He didn't have the drive. He had the key to the drive. The asset transfer wasn't happening here. It was happening at a private bank vault somewhere in the city. He pulled out the burner phone to text Evangeline, but before he could, it buzzed in his hand with a new message from her. A message that made his blood run cold. It was a trap. The meeting was a bluff to confirm I was suspicious. He never left the building. He's on his way back to the office. Get out now! Darian's head snapped up. He shoved the key and the receipt into his pocket and bolted for the door, his heart exploding in his chest. He was halfway across the plush carpet when he heard the faint, telltale ding of the executive elevator arriving on the floor. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run. The office door handle began to turn. There was no time to think, only to react. Instinct, primal and desperate, took over. As the door swung open, Darian didn't run for the exit Adrian was blocking. He spun around and hurled the heavy brass key with all his might, not at Adrian, but at the enormous, floor-to-ceiling window that made up the office's entire back wall. The key struck the reinforced glass with a deafening crack that sounded like a thunderclap. It didn't shatter, but a spiderweb of fractures exploded across the pane, a starburst of shattered crystal with the key embedded at its center. An ear-splitting alarm immediately began to shriek throughout the floor. a high-pitched, piercing wail designed for a catastrophic security breach. For a single, priceless second, Adrian Crown was frozen in shock, his arrogant smirk wiped from his face, replaced by disbelief as he stared at the ruined window. That second was all Darian needed. He sprinted past the stunned VP and out into the corridor, his heart trying to claw its way out of his throat. "Stop him!" Adrian's roar echoed behind him, shaking off the shock. "Security! He's a thief! Seal the floor!" Red lights began to flash along the ceiling, bathing the hallway in a hellish, pulsating glow. Darian ignored the executive elevator and slammed his hand on the button for the service lift, his mind racing. It was too slow. He abandoned it and bolted for the fire stairs, yanking the heavy door open and plunging into the echoing concrete well. He took the stairs 2, 3 at a time, his lungs burning. He could hear the heavy thud of security guards' boots on the stairs above him, their shouts echoing down the stairwell. He couldn't outrun them forever. He had to use what he knew. On the 35th floor, he burst out of the stairwell and ran down a short corridor, his old janitor's route burned into his muscle memory. He slipped into a utility closet, the door clicking softly shut behind him, just as 2 guards pounded past in the hallway. He leaned against the door in the cramped darkness, the smell of bleach and old mops filling his lungs as he fought to quiet his ragged breathing. He fumbled for the burner phone, his fingers slick with sweat. He typed a frantic message to Evangeline. "Have key. Vault is Sovereign Trust Bank. He knows. They're after me. Trapped." He slid the phone back into his pocket. He had delivered the information. Now he just had to survive. He cracked the closet door open a hair. The corridor was empty for now, but he could hear radios crackling from both ends of the floor. They were setting up a perimeter. He needed to go down, but the stairs were compromised. He scanned the closet, shelves of cleaning supplies, a deep sink, and in the corner, a small, square metal door marked with a faded lightning bolt symbol. The dumbwaiter. It wasn't for people. It was an old, pulley-operated lift used to send documents and supplies between floors before the building was modernized. It was small, dusty, and probably hadn't been used in a decade. It was his only chance. He pried the door open with a grunt. The shaft was dark and smelled of dust and grease. He could hear the cables groaning softly in the darkness. He squeezed himself into the cramped box, pulling the door shut, and blindly fumbled for the down button. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a lurch and a deafening screech of metal on metal, the dumbwaiter began its slow, noisy descent. It was a claustrophobic nightmare, the box swaying and groaning with every foot it dropped. He passed floors, seeing the floor numbers through the small, grimy glass window on the door. 34, 33. He was a sitting duck. If they figured this out, they could stop the lift and have him trapped between floors. He was passing the 20th floor when the dumbwaiter shuddered violently and stopped. The lights flickered and died, plunging him into absolute blackness. A voice crackled over the intercom system, a sound so close it felt like it was inside his skull. It was Adrian Crown. "Did you really think that would work, Darian?" Adrian's voice was calm, conversational, but dripping with venomous amusement. "This is my building. My security system. I know every wire, every circuit. I just cut the power to your little toy. You're in a metal box, hanging 20 stories above the ground. There's nowhere to run." Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to swallow him. He was trapped. "Here's what's going to happen," Adrian continued, his voice echoing in the shaft. "My men are going to be waiting for you on the ground floor. You're going to give them the key. Then you're going to be arrested for corporate espionage, theft, and vandalism. You'll be buried so deep in the legal system, your daughter will be grown before you ever see the sun again. Or you can make it easier on yourself. Just open the door and drop the key down the shaft. I'll get it, and I'll be more lenient. Perhaps they'll only think you're a common thief." Darian's mind raced. He was dangling in the dark, a pawn in a game he couldn't win, but he still had the key. He still had the one thing Adrian needed. He looked at the small window in the dumbwaiter door. It was grimy, but he could make out the floor number stenciled on the wall outside, 20. He knew this floor. It was the IT department, and directly across the hall from the dumbwaiter shaft was a server maintenance room, a room with its own dedicated high-priority emergency power. He took the handle of his mop from his cart. He'd clung to it out of sheer habit, and braced it against the door. He began to push. The old latch was rusted, stiff. Adrian's voice crackled again. "What are you doing, Darian?" "Don't be a fool. It's over." With a final, desperate heave, Darian put all his weight into the handle. The latch groaned, then snapped with a loud crack. The door swung open into the darkness of the 20th floor hallway. He was out of the box. "Security to floor 20. Adrian's voice on the intercom was no longer amused. It was pure, cold fury. "He's out. Get him." Now Darian scrambled out and ran. He could hear the ding of the main elevators down the hall. They were coming. He didn't have much time. He fumbled in his pocket, not for the key, but for the receipt from the vault. It was his only other piece of leverage. It was his only other hope. The 20th floor hallway was a long, sterile tunnel of flashing red lights. Darian could hear the heavy boot falls of security guards echoing from the east stairwell, and the chime of the main elevator arriving at the west end. They were closing in, a pincer movement with him in the middle. He ran. His only goal was the server maintenance room he'd spotted earlier. He slammed the door shut behind him, his back hitting the cool metal. He was in a small, cramped room, a chaotic jungle of bundled Ethernet cables, humming power supplies, and racks of spare hardware. There was no other exit. It was a dead end. His mind was a maelstrom of fear. He had the key. He had the receipt. But the information was useless if they caught him. They'd take both items, beat the truth out of him, and the plan would proceed. Adrian would win. Ivy would lose her father. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an answer, a miracle. And then he saw it, half hidden behind a rack of obsolete monitors. It was a relic from another era, a brass-rimmed terminal for a pneumatic tube system, a network of pressurized pipes the company had used decades ago to send physical mail and memos throughout the tower. Most of the system had been decommissioned, but this one, in the IT nerve center, still had a faint green power light glowing on its panel. Did it even work? He didn't have time to second guess. He pulled the key and the vault receipt from his pocket. He needed to send it somewhere Adrian wouldn't think to look. A place that was secure, but accessible to only one person. His mind flashed back to a detail he'd noticed on the building directory during his first week of cleaning. Floor 3, Suite 301, the Reed Founders Archive. Evangeline's father's old office, now a corporate museum piece she kept for sentimental reasons. He found an empty canister in the rack, stuffed the key and the receipt inside, and jammed it into the tube. He punched in the destination code for the archive, 301, and slammed his palm on the big red send button. For a sickening moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden, powerful hiss of compressed air, the canister shot up into the network of pipes, disappearing into the ceiling. It was gone. Whether it would arrive was anyone's guess. The door to the maintenance room burst open with a deafening crash. 2 massive security guards filled the doorway, followed by Adrian Crown. His tailored suit was immaculate, but his face was a mask of pure rage. His cold eyes scanned Darian, then the empty room. "Where is it?" Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. Darian stood his ground, his breathing heavy. He raised his empty hands. "It's gone." Adrian took a slow step forward, his knuckles white. "The key." "Where is it, Darian?" "Somewhere you'll never get it," Darian said, the defiant words tasting like blood and adrenaline. The corporate mask shattered. "You think this is a game?" Adrian snarled. He nodded to the guards. "Take him." "Not to security." "To the sub-basement." The guards seized Darian's arms, their grips like iron vices. They twisted his arms behind his back, forcing him to his knees before hauling him roughly to his feet. This wasn't an arrest. This was an abduction. Meanwhile, miles away in a darkened town car, Evangeline Reed watched the chaos unfold on a multi-screen display connected to her private network. She saw Darian get cornered on the 20th floor. She saw him disappear into the maintenance room. She saw Adrian and his men follow. She gripped the leather seat, her knuckles white, feeling utterly powerless. Darian was about to be taken, and her one piece of evidence was about to be lost forever. Then, a small, unexpected notification popped up in the corner of her screen. It was an alert from a system so old, she had forgotten it even existed. Pneumatic delivery system. Canister received at Station 301. Reed Founder's archive. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through her. He had done it. He had gotten the evidence out. She grabbed the secure phone. "Get me to the tower. Use the South Service entrance and get me the Attorney General on the line. Tell him it's happening." Darian barely registered the journey. He was dragged through service corridors, down a grimy freight elevator that smelled of oil and decay, into the deepest, darkest part of the building. The sub-basement was a damp, concrete cavern of pipes and machinery. They threw him into a small, windowless storage cage and slammed the barred door shut. Adrian stood on the other side of the bars, his face illuminated by a single, bare bulb overhead. He looked down at Darian, who was slumped on the floor, his shoulders screaming in pain. "I have an appointment at 2 o'clock, Darian," Adrian said softly. "It's a very important appointment, and I will not miss it. So you are going to tell me where you sent that key?" Darian just glared at him, silent. Adrian sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable. I see now that I'll have to provide you with some motivation." He pulled out his personal phone and tapped the screen. He turned it so Darian could see. It was a live video feed, a playground. Darian's blood ran cold. It was Ivy's school. The camera zoomed in on a group of children playing near the swings. He saw Ivy, her bright pink coat a splash of color, her laughter silent on the screen. "A beautiful girl," Adrian murmured, "so full of life." He swiped his finger, and the video feed changed. It was now from a different camera, showing a sleek black car parked across the street from the school. A man in a dark suit was leaning against it, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the playground. His gaze was fixed on Ivy. "The man in the car's a professional," Adrian said, his voice a venomous whisper. "He's very good at his job. He's currently on the phone with me, awaiting my instructions. So, you see, the key is no longer just about my future. It's about your daughter's." Darian stared at the screen, at his smiling, oblivious daughter, and the predator watching her from across the street. The fight went out of him, replaced by a terror so profound, it was paralyzing. "Now," Adrian said, his voice silky smooth, "let's try this again. Where did you send the key?" The image on the phone screen stole the air from Darian's lungs. Ivy, laughing, pushing a swing higher and higher, completely unaware of the shadow looming over her life. The man in the black car was a monster in waiting, and Adrian Crown held his leash. Everything else fell away. The pain in his shoulder, the cold concrete floor, the plan to stop a billionaire. All that existed was that image. The archive," Darian choked out, the words feeling like sandpaper in his throat. "The Founder's archive. 3rd floor. I sent it there." Adrian's lips curved into a triumphant, cruel smile. "See? Was that so difficult?" He glanced at his watch. It was almost 1 p.m. "You've wasted a lot of my time, Darian." He spoke into his phone. "Stand by, but stay put. The girl stays in sight until I have the package in my hand." He hung up and looked back at Darian, his eyes glittering. "Let's go. And Darian, you're coming with me, just to ensure a smooth transaction." The two guards hauled Darian to his feet. They left the sub-basement, taking the service elevator back up into the civilized world. To Darian, it felt like a death march. He had failed. He had given up the only piece of leverage they had, and Ivy was still a pawn in Adrian's game. At the same moment, Evangeline Reed swept through the south service entrance of the tower, flanked by two plainclothes officers from the Attorney General's office. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "He has the janitor in the sub-basement," she said into her phone, relaying information from her security contact. "And he's threatening the man's daughter. He knows where the key is. We have to assume he's on his way to retrieve it now. The archive is on the 3rd floor. Go now, quietly. I'll meet you there." She moved with a speed and purpose that belied her elegant suit, taking a different, more direct elevator. She knew the building's secrets better than anyone, including Adrian. She arrived on the 3rd floor a full 2 minutes before anyone else, her heels silent on the plush carpet. The Founder's Archive was just as she remembered it. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and a faint smell of her father's cigar smoke that never seemed to fade. She went straight to the pneumatic tube station in the corner. There, in the receiving bin, was the canister. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The antique brass key felt heavy, cold. The vault receipt was tucked beside it. She had it. She had the proof. She turned, ready to leave, and froze. Through the thick glass of the office door, she saw the elevator ding. The door slid open, revealing Adrian Crown. And beside him, held between two hulking guards, was Darian, his face bruised and pale with terror. Adrian saw her through the glass. His triumphant smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of pure rage, but he recovered instantly. He gestured for the guards to open the door. "Evangeline," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality as he stepped into the room. "How wonderful of you to join us. You've saved me a trip. Now be a good girl and hand that over." She held the key up, her grip tight. "It's over, Adrian. The Attorney General is on his way. His men are already in the building." Adrian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think that matters right now?" He nodded toward Darian. "This man has a daughter. A lovely little girl named Ivy. She's at school, playing on the swings. And I have a man with a car parked across the street, waiting for my call. So you can hand me the key, and we can all walk away from this, or you can watch a true tragedy unfold on your evening news." Evangeline's blood ran cold. She looked at Darian, saw the absolute terror in his eyes, and understood. This monster had her checkmated. Her company, her fortune. None of it mattered if a child had to pay the price. Her hand started to lower. Defeat was a bitter taste in her mouth. But Darian, seeing her about to give in, felt something snap inside him. He had been a victim. He had been a pawn. He was done. He wasn't going to let this man use his daughter to win. "No!" he yelled. In one explosive, desperate movement, he threw his entire body weight sideways, slamming into the guard on his right. The man, caught off guard, stumbled backward, crashing into a tall display case full of her father's crystal awards. The case toppled with a cataclysmic shatter, glass and trophies exploding across the floor. It was the chaos Evangeline needed. Adrian was momentarily distracted, his head whipping toward the sound. In that instant, she didn't run. She acted. She lunged forward, not at Adrian, but at the guard still holding Darian's other arm. She brought the heavy brass key up in a tight fist, slamming it hard against the guard's temple. The man grunted, and his grip on Darian loosened. "Call it off, Adrian!" she screamed, her voice raw with a fury he had never seen. Adrian just snarled, pulling out his phone. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." He stabbed a number on his screen. Darian scrambled free, grabbing the heaviest, most solid crystal award from the floor. He saw Adrian put the phone to his ear. He saw the cold, murderous intent in his eyes. He wasn't going to give an order. He was going to watch his daughter's life end. Just as Adrian's lips parted to speak, The double doors of the archive burst open. It wasn't more of Adrian's men. It was a tactical team of state police in full gear, weapons raised. "Drop the phone, Crown!" a commander shouted, hands in the air. Now, for a heartbeat, the world stood still. Adrian looked at the police, then at Evangeline, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He knew he was beaten, but he could still burn the world down with him. He held the phone to his ear. "Do it," he whispered into the phone. A single gunshot-like crack echoed through the room, but it didn't come from the police. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of the phone in Adrian's hand, which exploded into a shower of plastic and electronics. He cried out, dropping the shattered device. Standing in the doorway, behind the tactical team, was the new, grim-faced head of security. In her hand was a pistol, a thin wisp of smoke curling from its barrel. She hadn't aimed for him. She had aimed for the phone. The connection was cut. But was it in time? Had the order been heard? Darian's heart stopped, the silence in the room stretching for an eternity, filled only with the terrifying, unanswered question. For a long, silent moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of Darian's breath and the faint, tinny crackle of the shattered phone on the floor. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Was the order heard? Then the room exploded into methodical action. The tactical team surged forward, forcing a stunned Adrian Crown and his bewildered guards to the ground. The clatter of plasticuffs echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Adrian didn't struggle. He just knelt on the floor, a strange, empty smile on his face. The look of a king who had lost his kingdom but had managed to burn it down on his way out. Darian saw none of it. His world had shrunk to a single, terrifying point of focus. He stumbled toward Evangeline, his eyes wild with a frantic, desperate plea. "Ivy!" he rasped, his voice breaking. "My daughter! Did he?" Evangeline was already holding her own secure phone to her ear, her face pale but her voice a blade of pure command. "Report." Now she listened, her eyes locked on Darian's. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Darian felt his knees begin to buckle, the weight of his terror too much to bear. Then, Evangeline's expression softened, the iron control giving way to a wave of profound relief. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. "They got him, Darian," she said, her voice soft. "My security team, working with local police, had the man under surveillance. The moment the line to Adrian went dead, that was their signal to move in. He never even got the final order. She's safe. Ivy is safe." The words washed over him, and the strength that had held him together through the chase, the threats, and the fear, finally dissolved. His legs gave out, and he would have collapsed if not for the two plainclothes officers who caught him, easing him into a chair. He dropped his head into his hands, and a shuddering sob tore through him, a sound of grief, of terror, and of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. He had not failed her. 2 weeks later, the world was a different place. The name Adrian Crown was infamous, the subject of headlines detailing a shocking conspiracy of attempted murder and staggering financial fraud. The evidence against him was irrefutable. The cryptographic key, the vault receipt, and the labyrinth of forged documents and offshore accounts that Darian's initial discovery had helped unravel. Reed International, though shaken, was secure under Evangeline's steady hand. For Darian, life had become quiet. He'd been placed on indefinite, paid administrative leave, a ghost in the corporate system. He spent his days with Ivy, taking her to the park, reading her stories, never letting her stray too far from his side. The fear had subsided, but it had left a permanent echo. One crisp autumn afternoon, he heard a familiar, low rumble outside his apartment building. He looked out the window and saw it, the cherry-red Ferrari, parked in the exact same spot as before. But this time, he felt no fear. He met Evangeline in the hallway. She was dressed more casually, in a simple sweater and slacks. The icy armor of the CEO was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful composure. She wasn't carrying a checkbook. She was holding a simple, leather-bound portfolio. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, her voice gentle. She opened the portfolio. Inside were not checks, but official notarized legal documents. On the top page, he read the words, "The Ivy Merrick Lifetime Medical Trust." It was an ironclad, fully funded trust, guaranteeing his daughter the best possible medical care for the rest of her life, administered by a board of the nation's top doctors. It was more than a promise. It was a fortress built around his daughter's future. "I can't," he started, his voice thick. "You can," she interrupted softly. "And you will. You earned this, Darian. You saved my life, you saved my company, and you reminded me of something I had long forgotten." "What's that?" he whispered. "That the most valuable assets don't show up on a balance sheet." She closed the portfolio and held it out to him. "I also have another offer. I've created a new position at Reed International, Director of Internal Oversight. A person who answers only to me, who has the authority to look where others don't, to see the things that are hidden in plain sight. It requires a unique perspective." A faint smile touched her lips. "It pays better than a janitor's salary." "If you want it," Darian took the portfolio, the weight of it both heavy and incredibly light. He looked at this woman, who had once seemed like a distant, untouchable queen, and saw a survivor, a partner, a friend. "I'll think about it," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his own eyes. The next Saturday was bright and sunny. Darian and Ivy were at the park, the same one he had watched with terror on a video feed. But today, there were no shadows, no black cars. Today, there was only the sound of Ivy's laughter as she chased a butterfly across the grass. Evangeline met them there. She wasn't wearing a suit or carrying a briefcase. She was just a woman enjoying a day in the park. She bought them both ice cream, and the three of them sat on a bench, watching the city go by. Ivy, with chocolate smeared on her cheek, leaned against Darian and looked up at Evangeline. "Are you Daddy's new boss?" Evangeline smiled, a real, warm smile that transformed her face. "No, sweetie," she said, reaching out to gently wipe the chocolate from Ivy's cheek. "We're partners." Darian looked at his daughter, safe and happy, and at the woman who had helped make it possible. He knew their lives were forever intertwined, a strange and unlikely family forged in chaos and trust. The world was still full of dangers, but for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't facing it alone. The quiet janitor had found his voice. The isolated CEO had found her heart, and together they had found that the most powerful protection in the world was simply having someone you could count on. So that's the end of our story. I really hope a piece of it stays with you. If there was a moment or even just a character that really hit home, I'd honestly be honored to read about it in the comments. It's just amazing to see how one story can land in so many different ways. Look, if you believe stories like this are a kind of light we need in the world, your support means everything. When you like and subscribe, you're doing more than just helping a channel grow. You're really casting a vote for stories that aren't afraid to look at what makes us human. And you're helping that light find someone who might be in the dark. Thank you for lending me your time. It means a lot. Until the next chapter, take care of yourselves and each other.